two things that kind of jump to mind right away. One is, initially there was a lot of resistance to doing any of the Solidarity Fund work and the direct aid that we're doing now. That is simply not the relationship that CASA has to its members. We stand in solidarity with our members. We fight with our members. We do not give things to them. We're not, we're not a charity. And so there was a lot of resistance to that. Interestingly, from our staff, it was our member leadership council who told us, no, we have to change the way we're doing things. And you guys have to, this is an extraordinary situation and we have to change the kind of posture of CASA. So just sort of letting us get out of the gate with this took a little while, because I think we in the development shop were very much like, okay, let's start raising money right away and let's just get it to people, blah, blah, blah. But I think that there was a sort of ideological resistance to that based on what kind of CASA is. So that was a hurdle at first, but it was very clearly communicated to us by our members that this is what we had to do. And so once we got that kind of direction from the top, it was easy for us to work with our comms team, work with our administrative team to really pivot our overall stance towards what we would use those channels for, and how we would direct those communications. The other kind of major hurdle that we ran into is that, so we've always known that we had this particular weakness, which is CASA members are either either Latino or immigrant, or both, and they are necessarily low income. That is a qualification of being a member. And so typically, we've always known we have this blind spot. It's one of those known unknowns where member communications are in Spanish, and movement communications, are in Spanish, and fundraising is in English, right? Because those are the people that would donate. There is a huge group of people, especially now, who are either middle class or affluent Latino people who prefer their communications to be in in Spanish, but are not receiving donor communications now, right? Because we have it, that's been a blind spot for us to push to them, because of that kind of that dichotomy of like, oh, the English speaking audience, this is your donor class or whatever, right? Right now we're in the situation where the majority of donors that are coming into the Solidarity Fund that are responding to these ads or whatever, actually that's not fair, not the majority, but a significant percentage of them are these Latino people who would have preferred they received communications in Spanish. And so we've been pivoting to try to do that because typically our comms team will handle Spanish language communications. And so we've had to change around how we do our outreach to make sure that we had a lot more Spanish language fundraising talk in there.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's quite surprising. How about you, Christine? What have you guys seen?
Well, yeah, that's interesting piece, because I think we, in general, knowing that it's not a perfect dichotomy, but that is kind of like the functional dichotomy that we have in terms of the different language and copy that we put out. I also resonate with the challenge that you mentioned at the beginning around just the organizational shift that you have to do to take on this kind of work. Because certainly I think we felt similarly that people pretty clearly at first, both from our volunteer staff and from our local leaders, felt like this was something that was important to do, but it did raise a lot of questions because we've never done this kind of thing before. So it was really important that it was both meeting the needs of the community, but also kind of aligned with our principles or theory of change. Exactly as you said, that it doesn't feel like charity or that's fundamentally changing the relationship that we have with the community. That really felt like mutual aid. And so there were a lot of, in terms to actually just shift our capacity and to create that infrastructure from scratch. So that for us, it was really important that people who are seeking aid didn't feel a lot of bureaucracy, that they were able to see that the fund was actually then being administered by people like them, that there was, that it really was something of solidarity, and so that our immigrant leaders are the people who are doing the interview calls and making decisions about when to close or reopen applications and fundraising goals, which is really powerful. Also just actually moves a lot slower than, a development team can make the decision that we're going to do fundraising. So there's been a little bit of back and forth of definitely we were able to get the ball rolling and set up quite a lot. But then basically kind of just like several loops back of, oh, do we actually need to slow on fundraising while we catch up on processing applications? That kind of work that has definitely been worth it to be able to implement the fund in the way that we would want. But was just a lot of roadblocks because we'd never done that kind of thing before.
Mm-hmm.
In general, the way that our pivot worked, and something that brought in a new challenge is that we started to actually do quite a lot of ad spending in English for direct fundraising from our national Facebook page, all of which were things that we weren't really doing, definitely not at a large scale, definitely not consistently before. So even though, you know, we've jumped through all the hoops of different page authorizations and personal Facebook ad account authorizations, because we actually hadn't run these kinds of ads from our national page in a while, there was a whole new set of page ownership,
Mm-hmm.
business verification steps that we had to jump through that delayed things about a week. But then kind of as we were able to get the ball rolling, our focus really was targeting 3 audiences, retargeting our email list, retargeting our website and ActBlue viewers who didn't donate, and a lookalike audience of the lifetime donor values of our list. All things that we had knew were generally good practice to target, but that we never really invested a large capacity into doing. And definitely we started small of just knowing that we were also running a campaign around pledging your stimulus check as a donation.
Mm-hmm.
So we started that before the checks went out, and that was kind of when the public narrative and awareness of this began. And so we really tried to get the ball out, tried to jump ahead of that, and have a lot of people who had pledged and be part of the conversation so that people knew that this was a place you could donate your check. And then kind of as the first wave of checks arrived is when we started to see a large spike in donations from those people who had pledged, but also from a lot of new people. And so we invested a lot in adding more creative versions in the ads that were targeting the lookalike file, because we thought there was kind of a narrow window there of potentially reaching a lot of new people who were similar, not to our usual donors, but the particular new donors we were seeing in that period. So we actually invested. It was a little nerve-wracking because we've definitely never had an ad spend anywhere near that large. But
Christine, do you guys have separate social media identities that are sort of ally facing or donor facing?
It's a little challenging. So we have a lot of local pages for the different states, and in some cases even different cities, and those identities are, you know, they will occasionally do bilingual posts, but they're primarily all in Spanish, all in a voice that's targeting the community. And then our national page, we really try to do it sometimes kind of both ways from one single page, which has its strengths and weaknesses. And so on that, we would post both, for example, we had a day of action on May 1st, like a lot of people. So we posted kind of like a Spanish language recap. This is what we did, victory post. But that's also the same place that we would post separate English content for donors. So actually it is the same identity online.